Why is mindset important? Why do we even care? Because mindsets create self-fulfilling prophecies. Our thoughts become our feelings over time become our belief systems, and our belief systems equate our mindset. And once our minds are set, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. And getting to the root of this pattern, what are thoughts made up of? Words. It's my belief that words have a frequency and an energy, and that we can actually feel in our bodies. I'm very fond of saying, the universe's only job is to meet you exactly where you are and amplify the reality you create with every thought. So whether you're setting an intention, or you're saying a prayer, or you're having a conversation, are your words reflecting fear and scarcity and weakness? Or are they reflecting gratitude and strength and love? My son, some of you know my son Benny, he's 18. He was driving up to Aspen from Carbondale this weekend because he wanted to go skiing. And before I really dove into this work 6 years ago, I might have said something to him like, listen, you're only 18, you don't have a lot of experience. Highway 82 is super scary, it's really bad out there, and I mean, it's like slippery, and call me when you get there, right? Scarcity, weakness, fear. Instead, what I said was, because he's going up there to do something fun, right? Instead, what I said was, be safe, stay focused, have fun, I love you. And I know it felt different in my body to say it, and I know it landed differently for him. So, a little foundational history on mindset. Carol Dweck is arguably the founding mother of mindset. She wrote a book called Mindset, The Psychology of Success, and in it she defined mindset as a belief or way of thinking that determines one's behavior. Super simple. A fixed mindset is the belief that our abilities and intelligence are static and unchangeable. This can lead to fear of failure and avoidance of challenges. Whereas a growth mindset is the belief that our abilities and intelligence can be developed and improved through effort and learning and perseverance. It encourages resilience, a love of learning, and a really positive approach to setbacks. In a nutshell, a fixed mindset is about proving yourself, whereas a growth mindset is about improving yourself. So let's look at how these two mindsets work. And for simplicity, because fixed mindset and growth mindset are such a mouthful, I'm going to call the guy on the left Frank and the guy on the right Greg. And we're going to pretend, we're going to set the scene. They're both good friends, they're both in college, about to graduate, and both want to go to med school. Frank, fixed mindset Frank, is all about judging and outcome and results and appearances. He believes his intelligence is static, but he wants everyone to think he's smart. When he's faced with challenges, he either avoids them altogether or consciously or unconsciously self-sabotages. For instance, if he's about to take the MCATs, he may forget to set his alarm the night before and not have to take the test at all. When he faces obstacles, he's likely to give up easily, and it could show up as apathy. Or he might sandbag and have a good excuse on deck. Like with the MCAT example, he might not study at all, or he might cram at the last minute. And if he doesn't do well, he's got a great excuse. But if he does, then he still looks smart. Effort is pointless at best for Frank and dangerous at worst. Because effort means you're not good at it naturally, and people might see you making effort. If he doesn't do well on the MCATs, he's a failure. It's part of his identity. It's not that he simply didn't do well on one standardized test. It's who he is. It's part of his character. Greg, on the other hand, is all about growth. He's about learning and process and potential and opportunities. He embraces challenges, persists in the face of obstacles, and effort, he knows, is the very thing that makes him smarter and more talented and more skilled at something. Frank Frank is so worried about his image that any kind of constructive criticism or feedback is not going to land well. He's going to immediately be defensive. By its very nature, feedback means he wasn't perfect somehow the first time he did it. Whereas Greg is much more open to feedback. He sees it as an opportunity for improvement. And Frank sees Greg's success, and he feels really threatened because when the spotlight shines on Greg, it might also highlight some of his own imperfections and shortcomings. And all of this bottlenecks at the bottom for Frank. And confirms a very deterministic view of the world. He's less likely to ever reach his full potential. And while he can still succeed, because people with fixed mindsets can still succeed, he's very likely riddled with anxiety because he's constantly feeling like an imposter. On the other hand, Greg sees Frank's success and he's inspired. He thinks maybe he can learn something from him. It might even incite a little friendly competition. And Greg is more likely to celebrate Frank's success because they're friends. And you put all this together for Greg and it adds up to greater efficacy, less stress, higher levels of achievement, and a much greater sense of free will. And to be frank with all of you, and I mean that pun, to be honest with all of you, I was operating from a very fixed mindset well into my 30s, and I still have to catch myself to this day. Because there aren't just two people in the world. There's not the fixed mindset people and the growth mindset people. Like, we're all on this spectrum somewhere together. And I pulled this flyer off the wall at Dos Gringos down in Carbondale. And it's called the Power of Perspective Workshop. The power of the words we use with ourselves and others helps shape our daily reality. I mean, it's essentially what we're doing here tonight. And at first I was like, that is my workshop. Who is this person? What's going on here? And I got all competitive. I felt threatened. And I was like, all right, whoa, hit the brakes. What's going on here? Well, it's very unlikely that any of you in this room right now were at that other workshop 4 weeks ago. And the more people doing this work in the Valley, the better. So, how do we know we can change our minds? A person with a growth mindset believes that he or she can get smarter and better and more skilled at something through sustained effort, which is exactly the same thing that neuroplasticity tells us. Now, some of you in this room, I know, are familiar with neuroplasticity, and some of you, it might be something new. So this will either be a refresher or a primer. Anyway, neuroplasticity in 2 minutes or less.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. with repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So I've developed a 5-point model for how to foster more of a growth mindset. Because as we know and have established, a fixed mindset is riddled with fear. It's fear of failure, fear of judgment. Whereas a growth mindset is full of love, self-love, and trust in oneself and others. As Paulo Coelho says, don't give in to your fears, because if you do, you won't be able to talk to your heart. So how do we shift toward a growth mindset? We stay curious and release judgment of ourselves and others. Be emotionally honest and authentic. Take radical personal responsibility. Communicate mindfully and set hopeful expectations. Stay curious and release judgment of self and others. Simple, right? Why is judgment so bad? Is it so bad? Judgment gets a pretty bad rap. Judgment isn't inherently bad if it's used for a tool for discernment. However, most often judgment gets weaponized because it's rooted in fear. I'm going to judge others to make myself feel better. Or I'm going to judge others before they can judge me. Or I'm going to judge myself so harshly that maybe I can protect myself from others judging me. The truth is, we rarely know what other people are thinking or feeling. And let's be honest, other people probably are not thinking or feeling anything about us most of the time. Have you ever been in at a work meeting and made some embarrassing mistake, and you're just absolutely sure that everyone's staring at you and judging you, and they're probably doing is not, oh my God, I can't believe she just said that. That's so stupid. It's probably more like, oh, cannot figure out where to go for lunch today, right? Judgment and the fear it creates lives right here in our primitive brain center around the amygdala, the fight or flight part of our brain. And why is it so powerful? It can feel like life or death. And the reason our brains respond the same way around fear of judgment as somebody robbing us at gunpoint is because that fixed mindset and fear of judgment are actually humanity's default. Does anybody know why? Survival. Thousands of years ago, if we were judged or deemed unfit to be part of the group or the clan or the tribe, our very survival was at stake, let alone our odds at reproduction. So we evolved humans need to do a manual override. So how do we inoculate ourselves from damaging judgment? Curiosity. Higher brain function. Fear shuts down our learning centers in our brains. Whereas when we stay in curiosity, we learn things more deeply and we remember them for longer periods of time and more readily. So let's stay curious. Get comfortable with what I like to call living in the question mark. Because we are a society that is very uncomfortable with uncertainty. Perhaps conditioned from within the fixed mindset to always appear smart, like Frank. Does anyone know anybody who just loves to be right all the time? Yeah? Well, debate can be fun, but when we have to be right all the time and it becomes sort of an addiction, it can really damage relationships. So I like to say, when you always have to be right, what's going to be left? On the flip side, we are also wired for information seeking, or AKA curiosity. It's just not as strong of a pathway. So from an evolutionary perspective, there's a clear reason why humans and animals would seek out new information, because it can also be vital to our survival and our reproduction. And there's recent research that shows that curiosity is very likely processed in the reward center of our brains, meaning that curiosity could stimulate our brains in the same way that food and sex do, which is another great reason to stay curious. To simplify mindset even further, Marilee Adams wrote a book called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. Basically, her theory is that all day long, we get bombarded by these triggers, thoughts and feelings and circumstances. And because our default is to travel down what she calls the judger path, we have to find a way to override that. So she drew this map. She calls it a choice map. And the two paths she called the judger path, which is all about the fixed mindset, and the learner path, all about the growth mindset. So what happens when you find yourself traveling down the judger path and falling into the judger pit? It's all about who's to blame. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with them? And when you get stuck in the pit, or like I like to say, stuck in the mud, it's why am I such a failure? Why is that person so stupid? The judger path is all about automatic reactions. It's not a conscious path. It's blame focused and it's win-lose relating, meaning somebody else has to lose in order for me to win. Whereas the learner path is all about what happened? What's useful here? What do I want? What can I learn? What's that other person thinking and feeling and needing and wanting? It's about what's possible and what my choices are. The learner path is all about thoughtful choices. There's more consciousness around it. And it's solution focused and it's win-win relating. So what happens if you're like me and you see this flyer on the wall at Dose and you find yourself going down the judger path and you realize what's happening? Or maybe you're just sensing like, okay, I can feel that in my body. How can you shift gears and take a left turn and get back on the learner path? Curiosity. We ask switching questions. Like, what's happening right now? Because I could feel it. I just had to pause for a second. How else can I think about this? I wonder what's going on with this other person. What's possible right now? And I like to life hack with words. So they're easier for me when it comes to rewiring my brain and creating new pathways and taking this left turn. And one of my favorite words in the whole of the English language is huh. And not just any huh, I call it the neutral huh, because there's all kinds of hahs. There's like a really confused huh? Huh? There's a really enthusiastic huh? Huh! There's a really skeptical and judgy huh? Huh! And then there's the neutral huh. And the neutral huh is amazing. And I say it all day long. And my kids think I'm crazy, out loud, because it keeps me out of judgment every time. But the tone is critical. So a lot of times I even add the word curious at the end of it, like that, out loud. Huh, curious. Like somebody cut me off in the roundabout on Sunday, and I'm like, huh, curious. Now I could go into judgment. I could deem that person rude or like dangerous, and I'd be right. Of course I'd be right. But it doesn't feel good. And so, because I don't really know what is happening with that person. I don't know if they saw me. I don't know if they're on their way to the ER. I really have no idea, right? So why not just stay curious? And this is the other reason why I want to call that learner path the curiosity path, because I don't need to learn what that person was doing or what their reason was for pulling out when they did. I just have to be curious about it to stay out of judgment. So here's an example. My son comes home from school. I got sent to the principal's office today. Huh. Tell me more. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity when we can stay out of judgment. If I had been like, well, what the heck happened? You know, he's going to get defensive. I don't know if I'm going to get the whole story. Instead, it's an opportunity to explore his mindset. Is he going to go into blame of other people or the situation that got him in trouble? Or is he going to see himself as a failure or a victim or even a bad person? Or is he going to say things that reflect more of a growth mindset? Like, it was really unlike me. I know I'm a good person. I made a pretty bad choice, and I want to do better next time. It's an opportunity. Neutral, all day long. Another favorite word, 3 letters, is yet. Because yet keeps the door open. So if you ever find yourself saying something negative about yourself, or somebody asked you something. Somebody asked me if I had a publisher for my book. And I was like, no. And at first I was like, no, not yet. And then I was like, not yet. Or for anyone who works at the airport, I can see you're upset, sir, that your bags have not arrived yet. Right? Yet keeps the door open. It keeps it open to possibility and potential and curiosity and learning. And I'm 55 years old. What if we could teach our little kids this? Let's say I'm trying to get a little kid out the door. I'm like, okay, tie your shoes. Come on, we got to go. I don't know how to tie my shoes. Okay, I'll do it for you, right? But what if I said to that child, okay, tie your shoes. We got to get out the door. And that child said, I don't know how to tie my shoes yet. In my mind, I'm like, oh, would you like me to teach you? Possibility, potential, learning. Be emotionally honest and authentic. So, to keep our focus on growth and not appearances, we need to be really honest with ourselves about how we're feeling to show up most authentically and develop our emotional intelligence. Most people don't have the courage to feel their feelings and really own them and then act on them. It's seemingly more comfortable for us to be in various states of denial and justification and other methods of blurring our emotions. And I call this wishful feeling because it's like if we can convince ourselves we're not feeling something and we're actually feeling something else, maybe we can convince everybody else too. Like, I wish I wasn't nervous to speak in public. And if I convince myself I'm not nervous, then maybe I can convince all you too. But that's not authentic. And Brené Brown says, don't shrink, don't puff up, stand in your sacred ground. So, along those same lines, if I was shrinking, I'd be like, oh my God, thank you guys all for coming. I'm so nervous. You should really feel sorry for me right now. And also, you probably already know all this stuff anyway, so if you're bored and you have to leave early, that's totally fine. Or I can puff up, right? All right. I am the authority on positive psychology in this valley, and by God, you should all be hanging on my every word and do everything I say, but that's not my sacred ground. My sacred ground is I get a little nervous public speaking. I'm used to doing this stuff one-on-one or in front of my computer, and the truth is I'm so grateful to be here and share all of this with you, and if you can walk away from this workshop with a couple new ideas, then I'm going to be psyched. I worship at the altar of Brené Brown. She's best known for her tremendous research on shame, all about judgment, but also shame resilience and emotional authenticity, which is all about learning and growth. And she talks a lot about the power of owning our stories. She says, we either walk into the stories of our lives and own them, or we stand outside our stories and hustle for worthiness. Owning our story and loving ourselves through the process is the bravest thing that we'll ever do. And so why is it so brave? Because we've already established the fear of judgment is so strong in us, especially when we judge ourselves and make ourselves wrong for what we're feeling. So how can we use positive language to foster compassion and encouragement for emotional honesty? Well, of course, ... I'm a huge fan of ellipses. So when I was being a little hard on myself when I started teaching these workshops about being nervous public speaking, I said to myself, and this is a true story, of course you're nervous. 75% of the population has a deathly fear of public speaking. It's number 2, only to the fear of death itself. dot, dot, dot. And what else is true? What else is true is I'm pretty proud of myself for being up here, and I actually have fun doing this. I like doing this and teaching people about this work. Another way to support emotional honesty and authenticity is to avoid hyperbole. How can we ever be authentic and honest when we use words like always and never? In fact, here's a fun quote. Always and never statements are always false and never true. We all use hyperbole sometimes, and always and never sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love to exaggerate. But when we're having a serious conversation with somebody, or even worse, an argument, hyperbole can be really, really harmful and equally damaging in negative self-talk. So, it's also really important to remember that we can only heal from a place of truth and authenticity. So, Dina.
Oh, do you want me to come up?
If you want,
Oh, come
on up. Be in the spotlight.
I'll show
Dina,
you.
everyone.
Hi, everybody.
So I just want you to feel what it feels like in your body. Feel what it feels like to hear this little mini dialogue. Dina, you never listen to me.
I always listen to you.
Right? Is there a reality where either of those things could ever be true? Probably not. Right? Instead, Dina, sometimes I feel like you don't listen to me.
Really? Like when?
See what happened there? She got coached really well. Thank you, sweetie. Yay. Hypothetical response. But what happened there was she didn't get defensive. She's like, wait, really? When? It got specific. It got specific and not universal. And it might make the other person actually curious rather than defensive. We can also miss the real message, and this is where it gets really meaty. The underlying feeling being expressed. If I said, Dina, can we talk because I really want to be listened to? How does that feel? How does it feel to hear it? It feels really different for me to say it. It's about me. It's an I statement, right? It's not about what she's doing wrong anymore. It's about something that's really vulnerable for me and really honest. Always and never are symptoms of all or nothing cognitive distortions. They're inaccurate extremes, and they have the power to alienate people and damage our own self-esteem. Like, I always say the stupidest things, or I'll never understand that teacher's homework. Or it can also be beneficial to train ourselves to use sometimes, just more often in general, even when we're trying to be funny. Does anybody have an always or nothing statement they might like to share and just see what it feels like to switch it to sometimes? No brave people? It's okay. It's okay. Public speaking is terrifying. Always, for everybody. You don't even have to be mic'd up. It's scary. All right, where were we? Take radical personal responsibility for the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what do I mean by radical personal responsibility? Well, we can only take responsibility for our side of a relationship or an interaction, for how we show up, what we line up with, and what we do and say. And I call it radical responsibility because I'm suggesting 100% of the responsibility, no matter who else is involved. If you want to be empowered, not if you don't. I'm not sure where we ever got the idea. 50-50 was the ratio when it comes to relationships in general or on any given day. You can certainly make a request of another person with the understanding that there's no guarantees how they're going to show up. They could show up with 20% or their requisite 50%, or they could show up with 100% on their own, and then you have 200%, which is even better. So I have this example. I had a client who wanted to have a better relationship with her dad. And I was all in favor of that. Sounded great. I said, well, what do you want? She said, I want to talk to him every week. And I want to, that time with him so that we can improve our relationships and I can feel closer to him. I was like, great. And I checked back in with her and I said, how's it going? And she said, well, yeah, I've been calling him and we've been having these great conversations and it feels really good. I'm like, great. And she's like, but I feel like I'm the only one picking up the phone. So I'm like, oh, well, what are you going to do about that? And she said, well, I'm going to ask him to meet me halfway and call me, 50% of the time. I'm like, great. And I talked to her a couple of weeks later. I'm like, how's it going? She's like, we haven't talked. I'm like, well, why not? And she said, because he said he would, but he's not, so I'm not going to call him every single time. I'm like, well, what do you want? And she's like, I want to talk to him every week, and I want to have a better relationship with him. I'm like, I don't think that's what you want. I think what you want is to stay attached to this inequity and this injustice. And if that's truly what you want, you're going to be willing to go the 100%. So let's start with the bad and the ugly. When we're exclusively taking the judgment path and blaming others, we also give away all of our power. Yes, things happen to us, and people do and say things to us. And I am in no way suggesting that we celebrate injustice or condone bad behavior. But if blame is our focus, then the only opportunities for positive change also stay outside of our control, and you get stuck in the mud at the end of that judger path. So let's say a student does poorly on an exam. The teacher hates me. That test was totally unfair. I'm never going to get a good grade in that class. It might be true that his teacher hates him, but he's lost all of his agency, meaning he hasn't taken any responsibility for the bad grade or the bad relationship. And by doing that, he's disempowered himself for the future. He's a lot more likely to just completely give up because he's convinced himself he's helpless. So what I'd say to that student is, that sounds really hard. Now what? Another good place for a neutral and a ... Because sometimes a now what is just enough to shake somebody out of their helplessness. Now what? What can you control in this situation? What's possible? And he might say something like, well, I guess I could study harder next time, or maybe I could meet that teacher after school and go through the exam. And now for the flip side, the good. I would also invite all of you to take radical responsibility for your wins and successes. And not in a cocky way. It doesn't even have to be out loud. But remember Greg and the growth mindset. Success for him means I learned something. Now how can I sustain it? And then how can I build on that? In positive psychology, we call that broaden and build. And in spiritual psychology, we call it bragging. In spiritual psychology, we learn to destigmatize the brag. We even have brag circles. We open meetings with brags. And this can be uncomfortable sometimes because it does feel a little less humble. It's a lot harder for women than it is for men for some weird reason. Women tend to deflect more. But it's pretty fun. I don't know if anybody has a brag they would be willing to share tonight. Well, I'm bragging that I'm more than halfway through this presentation and I'm still standing, so. Getting good at celebrating our wins helps us stay away from giving too much credit to luck. This is a word I would like to virtually eliminate from my vocabulary. And there's There's not very many instances I can ever think of where I cannot replace the word luck or lucky with grateful or deserving. For example, like let's say a student gets a good grade on a test and comes home and is like, yeah, I was super lucky, that test was so easy today. What's she done? She's discounted all of her skill or any effort she might have put into it. Instead, she might say something like, yeah, I studied pretty hard. I deserve that A. And she'd be right. This actually happened not too long ago. Somebody came up to me and said, you're so lucky. Dos Gringos is so busy these days. And I was like, yeah, thank you. I was like, what I said was, yes, I'm very grateful that Dos Gringos is so busy these days. And in my head, I was saying, and I've worked my butt off for the last 23 years, so I think I probably deserve a little bit of that success too. So, some other ways we can use language radically and responsibly is to try and avoid have to. Shocker, right? But have to, from a neuroscience standpoint, tricks our brains into thinking a situation has been forced on us and that we have no control when almost always we have actually chosen that situation. So maybe we try some choosing words like I'm going to, or I want to, or I get to. Even if the task isn't pleasant, there's usually some kind of favorable outcome. Like I hate going to the grocery store, but I love groceries. So if somebody asked me, hey, Julie, what are you doing this afternoon? It would sound pretty natural for me to say, well, I have to go to the grocery store, and then I have to go to the chiropractor. But what happens is our brains think we have no agency around these tasks. So instead, see if this lands different for all of you. Hey, Julie, what are you doing this afternoon? Well, I want to go to the grocery store, and I get to go to the chiropractor, right? Free will. Benny said, there's not very many things we actually have to do besides breathe. My son Benny I was playing around with him with some of this stuff, and he's like, well, Mom, if you get pulled over for speeding, you have to give the cop your driver's license and registration. And I was like, no, you don't. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you want to do that because there are consequences if you don't, but you actually don't have to. All right, should and should have work almost the same way as have to, but there's a layer of judgment and there's a layer of guilt oftentimes. And worse than that, should and should have do not live in the present moment. They live in the past, where you should have done this or you should have done that, and there's nothing you can do to change it in the present moment. Or, I should lose 5 pounds. It's in the future. There's nothing I can do to make that happen right now in the future. So, I want to lose 5 pounds. ... Now what? Well, tonight I could make a salad instead of a lasagna. Ellipses. Communicate mindfully. Okay, now this is like at least 5 workshops all by itself. We're going to focus in on negativity bias exclusively. What is it? Negativity bias is a psychological phenomenon that refers to the tendency of humans to give more attention and importance to negative information and experiences than the positive ones. From an evolutionary perspective, negativity bias may have evolved as a survival mechanism. In our ancestral environments, it was more crucial to pay attention to potential threats and dangers, everything that's wrong in our environments, than positive or even neutral ones. And negativity bias can manifest in various aspects of our lives, such as memory. People are more likely to remember negative events and experiences vividly and for longer periods of time. Emotionally, negative emotions like fear and anger often have a stronger and longer lasting impact on a person's well-being. Decision making. Negativity bias can influence decision making by making people more risk averse or prone to avoiding potentially negative outcomes altogether. And social interactions. Negative social interactions and criticisms tend to have a greater impact. And given all this research, and because we know that negative experiences and emotions will likely have a stronger emotional impact, it makes sense that negative words will tend to be more memorable. So, hey Julie, you want to go to a party tonight? Why not? Hey Benny, will you take out the trash? No problem. How's work? Can't complain. Benny, don't forget to take that permission slip to school today. What are the operable words in all of those phrases? Not. What's that?
Negative words.
Negative words. Not. Problem. Complain. And forget. That's what our brains are going to register first and foremost. Hey, Julie, want to go to a party tonight? Sounds great. Benny, will you take out the trash? You bet. How's work? It's going great. And Benny, remember to take your permission slip to school today. He's 40% more likely to actually remember it by saying, please remember, and not don't forget. Almost every day, I won't say every day because that's like always and never, around 11 o'clock, I get a call at Dos Gringos. Are you still serving breakfast? And for the longest time, I used to say, no, actually we stopped serving breakfast at 11. And it would land so flat, and I'd feel like I'd let this person down horribly. And it took me a few tries and a little bit of research to figure out a new response. Hey, you still serving breakfast? Actually, we serve breakfast every day till 11 o'clock. And right now, we're on our lunch menu. And usually they're like, oh, great. And they stay on the phone and they order with me, and I haven't let them down somehow. All right, let's talk about our butts. We often use but in the place of and. And of all the words on the board right now, I think we use this one the most. And it's not that it doesn't belong, and it's not that it doesn't have its place once in a while, but is low-hanging fruit. And you know what they say about low-hanging fruit? Pick it. So, I have been trying to train myself. It's not always easy, and it's not always appropriate, but almost always appropriate. We can to substitute but with and. I love you, Dave. I love you. I'm so mad at you right now. What does that do? It negates everything before the but. That's not true. We can hold both of those truths in our minds and our hearts at the same time. Which feels better? Jenny, I love you, but I'm so mad at you right now. Or Jenny, I love you, and I'm so mad at you right now. Yes, that's the right answer. And keeps the conversation open. Our brains and the other person get to consider and understand both parts of that sentence as equals. We can hold both of those truths simultaneously without them contradicting each other. Does anyone have a but statement they would like to change into an and statement? Every statement. Good answer. Set hopeful expectations. You might raise your eyebrows at this. Are expectations healthy or are they dangerous? Both. Expectations themselves are not dangerous. In fact, they're critical and they're very powerful. And why is that? Because they create the potential for the highest outcome. And when hopeful expectations are set from within a growth mindset, we are creating an even greater capacity for the positive within ourselves and then also interactively with other people. We're demonstrating that we see the potential and we trust that we can step into it. Because without hope, you can't have positive change. And without positive change, we can get stuck in a terrible rut of depression and resentment and anxiety. The minute you become hopeless, you become helpless. So when are expectations dangerous? They're dangerous when you get attached to the positive outcome that you've set for some sense of success or worthiness or well-being. Because this would indicate a predisposition for a fixed mindset. When the expectation is set from within a fixed mindset, it's likely to be about the person and not the process. So if I get this promotion, I am a good person. I'm a good employee. I am worthy. That is about the person. Instead, if I get this promotion, it means all my hard work is paid off. That is about the process. When we set hopeful expectations of other people, it can be healthy or it can be dangerous. We are showing them that we see their potential and we trust that they can step into it. And it can feel good for both people. But what we simply need to be aware is that this can be encouragement or it can actually be about pressure. And if we're attached to the outcome and it's outside of our control, there's a danger of becoming disappointed or resentful of the other person and damaging the relationship. Whose goal is it? So how do we discern whether our hopeful expectations are being set from within a growth mindset or within a fixed mindset? We look for clues. We listen for clues for whether statements or beliefs are about character or characteristics. Are they universal or are they unique? And are they fixed or are they fluid? Also notice any resistance to taking on new challenges. Is there a fear of failure or a fear of looking foolish? And listen for statements of apathy, a belief that talent and skills are mostly innate and not worth the effort to try and improve. And pay attention to how your words affect your body and your emotional state and the effect that they have on the people around you, like those customers at Dose. There's also a mindset quiz, and I have some handouts back there. You're welcome to take one. You're welcome to take the quiz. You're all already experts, though, and you can cheat your way to a really good score if you want, because it's going to be pretty obvious what the right answer is. But I'll just tell you this. I've never gotten higher than a 24 out of 30 on that quiz. Because, again, we're all on this spectrum. So be honest and authentic if you take one and you're taking it for yourself. But you could also share it with somebody at home, too. And keep in mind that we're calling it mindset, but it really should be called mind state. Because on any given day on this spectrum that I've already talked about, we can shift pretty dramatically depending on the circumstances, the stress level. Did you get any sleep? Are resources low? And most importantly of all, coming from me, is to have fun. Because that's my mantra. I don't do it if it's not fun. And if it seems like it's not going to be fun, I find a way to make sure it's going to be fun. So it can be fun to share this work with other people, your friends and your family. It's kind of like a word game, especially over the holidays. But I wouldn't oversell it. I would start with you and then maybe lead by example, because you could have some people walking on eggshells in a quick hurry. Use language that really feels authentic for you. These are my words that I've shared with you, but you might notice other words in your daily lives that feel more empowering or more disempowering. And remember to be gentle with yourself if you catch yourself using but or always or never, because it happens to all of us. As I said, that's the stronger neural pathway. So it's up to us to try and manually override that. And be patient, because it does take practice and it takes time to build these new pathways. And use humor and keep it light. We are all brilliant dramatic actors once we realize we're starring in a comedy. Matthew McConaughey, unexpected source for an inspirational quote. And to that point, I'll share one last story about keeping it light and embracing a growth mindset. I spent 5 weeks in Italy last year over the holidays, and the 2 weeks leading up to New Year's, everyone I met on the bike path or in a restaurant or in a shop, I'd say, Buon anno, Happy New Year. And I spend a lot of time in Italy. I speak okay Italian, and the Italians are really friendly people, and I wasn't getting the reaction that I normally got. I was getting a lot of head cocks and quizzical looks. And I was literally 2 weeks later having drinks with my landlord, who also happens to be my Italian tutor. And I wanted to ask him about it. I said, do you guys say something different here? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I've been saying buon anno to people to say Happy New Year, and I'm getting really weird looks. He's like, what are you saying? I said, buon anno. That's how you spell it, buon anno. Pretty simple. And he's like, there's 2 N's, Julie. You're not saying both the N's. I'm like, yeah, I am. He's like, say it again. I'm like, buon anno. He's like, no, buon anno. I'm like, well, so what? He's like, well, you're telling everyone to have a good asshole. Open to feedback. All right, it takes millions of neurons to have a single thought, so let's be thoughtful about the words that we choose and use every day, because what wires together fires together. And I would encourage you, if you have any epiphanies or aha moments, I would love to hear about them. You can go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, or send me a message. You all probably have my phone number anyway. And if you do sign up on my website, I do have a whole bunch of workshops I'm considering in various places in 2024. Here are some examples. I may turn some of these into series for parenting or professional or personal development, like relationship. And